Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever location you are. And my name is Kumar. Welcome back to my channel Kumar Programming. Today I'm going to start an interview question answer series in Node.js. And why not? Node.js is getting very popular nowadays because of its performance and also it is a cross platform. So there are several things are there in Node.js, right? So we are going to cover all those interview question answers and I'll be covering all those interview questions from basic to advanced, where I would be having around 10 to 15 sections, and each sections would be having around 10 to 15 questions, and all those questions we will cover along with the practical. We will see the example, we will have the practical, and we will understand thoroughly each and everything. Okay, so now let's start. The very first section which I'm going to cover is Node.js basic. Inside basic section, we are going to cover around 11 questions like what is Node.js and why we use Node.js, right? And then we are going to cover difference between runtime environment and framework, right? And what is V8 engine? This is very important, okay? And what all the feature of Node.js, or we can say what is the benefit of Node.js, right? And what is non-blocking IO and why it is important in Node.js, and what is event loop and how it works. So I would say this is the most important questions we have in Node.js. If you are going for an interview, somehow interviewer will ask about event loop. Without these questions, your interview is not going to be complete for sure. And further, we will see what is difference between process.nextTick and setImmediate functions. Also, we will see what is task queue and what is microtask queue, right? And the very important feature, which is how Node.js handle multi-threading if it is a single threaded, right? So we will also learn how it is. And further, we will see how the garbage collection works in Node.js. Definitely, we must have to see that what are the disadvantages of Node.js as well, right? So we are going to cover all these questions in the very first section, which is Node.js basic, right? So now let's start with the very first question. What is Node.js and why we use Node.js? So the very first question is what is Node.js and why we use Node.js, right? So in order to understand Node.js, first let's understand few things like what all the server side languages we have. So we know that Python is a server side language, right? Java is a server side language. C# is a server side language. JavaScript is a client side language, right? We know that JavaScript, VB all these are client side languages. But after introducing Node.js, JavaScript become as a server side languages as okay. So this Python, Java, C# is not a client side language. These all are the server side languages. But JavaScript is a client side as well as server side language both, right? And it is running at the server side because of this Node.js, right? And also in order to create application on these languages, we need to have framework, right? So if you know that Python is having a Django framework, Java is having a Spring Boot, Spring framework, C# is having a Microsoft .NET framework, right? Similarly, JavaScript is also having an Express.js framework, right? Then what is Node.js? So Node.js is a runtime environment, right? Like Python is having a C Python, Java is having a Java virtual machine, C# is having a common language runtime, and JavaScript is having a Node.js runtime environment. And what this runtime does, these runtime environment execute these languages inside the framework. So these runtime environments compile these languages, handle garbage collections, memory management, everything is being done by this runtime environment. So again, I'm repeating, Node.js is a runtime environment, right? So now let's see. Node.js is a runtime environment to execute JavaScript code at server side, right? And it's free, open source, and support for the cross platform. Be remember that Node.js is used to create application at server side. And Node.js neither a language nor a framework, right? So Node.js is neither a server side language or framework. Okay, what it is? It is a runtime environment. Okay, and Node.js was invented by Randall in 2009, right? Now let's see why we use Node.js. So whenever we are talking about the performance, always Node.js come into the picture. Okay, and it is also used to create microservices and API development. And we can create a front-end application also in Node.js. I have created a complete project as a library management in Node.js by using our EJS template. And if you want to see, let me show. So here in my channel, you can see here, I have this step-by-step complete project, Node.js Express. And this is the library management project where I have created this project from scratch till the deployment. So if you want to learn how we can create a front-end project in Node.js, you can just watch this video. Now let's go back. And also Node.js is used wherever we need real-time data and collaborations, right? Like we have a chat applications, right? Where we need the real-time data and collaboration. And essentially we use Node.js because it is fast, scalable. Scalable means it can be extended, cost effective, and leverage JavaScript. So you don't have to learn anything else in Node.js if you know the JavaScript, right? Which allow for a unified development experience for front-end and back-end both, right? Now, there would be a question coming in your mind, like what is difference between runtime and framework, right? So now let's see the second question. So let's see what is difference between runtime environment and framework, right? So we learned Node.js is a runtime environment, right? So what is this runtime environment? Runtime environment provide an infrastructure for code execution, right? And also providing service like memory management, IO operation, compilation of the code, all those kind of. So this is our server side language, and this is getting compiled inside runtime environment and getting executed inside the framework, right? Then what is framework? Framework provide a structured way, right, to build application using pre-built tools, library, conventions. A framework typically sit on top of runtime environment. So framework is provide a structured way to build application, right? Now there would be a question coming in your mind. This JavaScript was a client-side language. Now it becomes as a server-side language and it is getting executed inside Node.js, right? So how it could be possible? This client-side language becomes as a server-side language as well. So the key thing is V8 engine. Now let's see our next question. What is V8 engine? So the very next question is, what is V8 engine? In order to understand V8 engine, first of all, let's understand how V8 engine is associated with client side and server side, right? So we know that at our client side, we have our client machine, mobile, computer, right? And from these computers, from these laptops, we are sending the request to the server side using our browsers, Chrome browsers, Safari, Edge, Firefox. These all are the browsers. Through those browsers, we are sending the request to the server side, right? And these browsers are using the JavaScript. And this JavaScript inside this Chrome is getting executed by help of JavaScript engine, right? So each browsers like Chrome is having V8 engine, Firefox is having Spider Monkey, Safari is having JavaScript core, Internet Explorer, Edge is having Chakra. So these all are the JavaScript engines used by the browser. Here we are talking about V8 engine because V8 engine is picked from Chrome, from Google, and used inside the Node.js, right? So inside our Chrome, we have our V8 engine, right? And this V8 engine is responsible to execute this JavaScript inside this browser. So this is the story of client side. Now what happened the server side? At the server side, we have to run this JavaScript file, JavaScript code at the server side. And how it is possible? It is possible with the help of Node.js. And how Node.js execute this JavaScript at the server side? So what happened? This V8 engine, Node.js took this V8 engine from Chrome browser and put inside this Node.js, right? So now our JavaScript code can be executed at the server side as well. That's why I said JavaScript is now a client-side language as well as server-side language both, right? So what we can say here, browser execute JavaScript at client-side using V8 engine, right? And similarly, Node.js execute JavaScript at server-side by using V8 engine, right? V8 is a very powerful and fast JavaScript engine used by browser and Node.js both. So V8 engine is very fast JavaScript engine used by Node.js in order to execute our JavaScript code at the server side, right? So the very next question which we are going to cover, what all the feature of Node.js. Now let's see. So the next question is, what all the feature of Node.js? Essentially, we have a lot of features of Node.js, but here I'm going to discuss some of them which are very, very important. So the very first is asynchronous and event driven, right? So Node.js is always work on asynchronous and event driven. What does it mean by asynchronous? Asynchronous, simply we have two functions. Suppose that I have a function 1 and I have function 2, right? This is my function 1 and this is my function 2. Asynchronous means both of the functions are executing parallelly, right? That is asynchronous. And what does it mean by event driven? Each functions are having associated with a event. Suppose that this is associated with event E1 and this is associated with event E2, right? So once this function will be completed, then this event will execute. Event is also a function. Once this function 1 will be completed, then after that this event will be executed. And also once this function 2 will be completed, then event 2 will be executed. So this is asynchronous and event driven, right? So what is synchronous? Synchronous is something these two functions are getting executed sequentially. First of all, function 1 will execute, and once function 1 will executed, then after that function 2 will execute, and that is known as a synchronous. However, Node.js work on asynchronous and event driven approach. Now let's see the next feature. Now the very next feature is single threaded. Node.js is a single threaded, right? Since Node.js built on top of JavaScript, and JavaScript itself works on a single threaded, but still it's very, very fast. That we will discuss in our upcoming questions. And the next feature is cross-platform. So Node.js can run on multiple platforms. It can run on Windows, it can run on Linux, Unix, iOS, Android, and many more, right? So Node.js support for the cross-platform, and that's why it is very, very getting popular. The very next feature we have is NPM, that is Node Package Manager. It is used to manage all the packages and library inside Node.js, right? We have several packages that can be installed by using this NPM, and NPM is getting installed by default while installing our Node.js. Now let's see the next feature, which is fast execution with V8 engine. It's very, very fast because of we are using V8 engine, and V8 engine is nothing. That engine is used by Chrome browser, right? And the same engine we took inside our Node.js and make our JavaScript executable at the server side, right? Now the very next feature which we have, real-time application support. Real-time application support, basically we have our chat application wherever we communicate with the real-time data, right? It's support for real-time application as well. The very next feature we have is JSON support for API development, right? So it's support for the JSON, JavaScript object notation, right? Whenever we are doing our API development, RESTful APIs, right? GraphQL API, all it's support for all those APIs in the form of JSON data, right? Now the very next feature is non-blocking IO. Non-blocking IO, it's a very, very important feature for Node.js. This is something that our resources, our server resources is not getting blocked, right? Whenever we are trying to use one resource from one request, and the same time the another request can use the same resources as well. So it's not going to block our IO. And our user, our client should not wait to complete for another request. That is something non-blocking IO. We will discuss it about in our upcoming questions in detail. The very next feature which we have is extensive library. Node.js is having a huge amount of extensive libraries that can be used inside our Node.js applications, and it is being managed by large community and it is maintained by them. The very next feature which we have is RESTful APIs. Node.js is used to create RESTful APIs, and also it used to create the GraphQL API, which is getting also very, very popular nowadays, right? The very next feature which we have is active open source community. So Node.js is having a very big active open source community. If you have any queries or any kind of problems, then you can get the solution from there, right? Now the very next feature we have high performance. So Node.js is always known for high performance. High performance because of its single threaded, but internally it is having a worker threaded as well. That I will discuss in our upcoming questions, right? And the very next feature is easy to learn. Why easy to learn? Because Node.js is built on top of JavaScript, and if you know the JavaScript, then there is no other languages need to learn. JavaScript is enough to learn Node.js, right? So this is all the features that we have and some of the things that we are going to discuss in detail in our upcoming questions. Now let's move to the another question, which is non-blocking IO, right? Now we have the next question, which is what is non-blocking IO and importance of it in Node.js? This is very important questions, friend. And certainly this is going to be asked by anyway in your interview. So let's understand this. So first of all, let's see what is synchronous, right? So as in our previous question, I mentioned that synchronous is something that tasks or functions are getting executed sequential, right? First, our task 1 will be completed, and once the task 1 will finish, then our task 2 will start, right? And after that, task 3 and task 4 and so on, right? So in this case, you can see here, this task 2 is waiting for task 1, right? And task 3 is waiting for task 2, and task 4 is waiting for task 3, right? So here, and if you see here, total time taken is 45 seconds. So it's quite slow, right? On the other hand, in asynchronous, all these tasks, task 1, task 2, task 3 and task 4, they are getting executed parallelly, right? So all of the tasks are getting executed parallel. So task 1 is getting completed in 20 seconds, task 2 7, task 3 10 seconds, task 4 in 8 seconds, and total time taken by all of the tasks is 20 seconds. So it's quite fast, right? So because all of those tasks are getting executed parallelly, that is known as a asynchronous, right? And this asynchronous operation can be performed by using our callback and promises in JavaScript, right? If you don't know about the callback and promises, don't worry. We are going to have discuss in detail in our upcoming videos. But as of now, this asynchronous operation can be handled by callback and promises. And what all these callback and promises methods are? These are something like file reading, querying to the database, sending HTTP request to the server. So these kind of operations is being always handled by callback and promises, right? So now let's see what is non-blocking IO then, right? So non-blocking IO operations are like file reading, database, query, or HTTP request, right? Those kind of functions or operations are executing without waiting for the another operation to complete, right? So they are not waiting for each other. They are just executing parallelly. And when the IO operation is finished, the result is handled asynchronously via callback functions, right? So when the task is completed, the result are getting returned by callback functions, right? So this is something non-blocking IO. This question can be asked by the interviewer in a different way, like what are the IO operations? So IO operations are nothing. They are like file reading, querying to the database, HTTP request, right? All those kind of operations are known as a IO operations, and these operations are not blocking to each other, right? They are not waiting for each other with the help of callback and promises. That's why we say as a Node.js work as a non-blocking IO, right? Now let's move to the next question, which is very important, and that is the heart of the Node.js, that is event loop. So our next question is what is event loop and how it works in Node.js? I would say this is very important, and this is the heart of the Node.js. And this question is going to be asked by the interviewer certainly somehow. And your interview is not getting completed without this question for sure, right? So now let's understand that what event loop is and how it works. So before understanding the event loop, first of all, see what we have in our JavaScript, right? So we have our JavaScript code, and in that JavaScript code, we have our main function, right? Where we are going to start our main thread, and inside that function, inside that application, we have some kind of synchronous function and asynchronous functions, right? So if we have synchronous functions, that is going to be executed immediately, but in case of if we have asynchronous functions like callback and promises, then how they are going to be handled, right? So we will understand all those things step by step. So here we have our JavaScript code. As soon as our JavaScript code is getting executed with the help of V8 engine, then the very first thing comes into the picture, which is call stack, right? The functionality of this call stack, it took the function step by step, register over here, and then execute them. Okay, so the very first time our main function will come over here, right? So here our main thread is getting started, right? And once main thread is getting started, then our next function, next block will come over here, that is the synchronous function. And if this is a synchronous function, this is going to be executed immediately. Okay, so it's going to execute it immediately, and our next block will come, and next block block is asynchronous function, which is a type of callback, right? And whenever we are having the asynchronous function, in that case, it's going to be handled in a different way. They are going to assign to a API, right? So in the Node.js, in the backend side, we have some sort of APIs. And as soon as this function is getting assigned to the API, there is a library in Node.js that is known as a LIBUV that is written in C++, right? It's very important library, and because it is managing these asynchronous operations, right? And this library is having number of idle threads inside a thread pool, right? So it assign a thread to this function, and then this function is going to be assigned to the APIs, right? So now if you see here, this function, this async function assigned with the thread, and then it going to be assigned to the API, respective API, right? So we have several kind of APIs like fetch API, timer API, console API, geolocation API, web storage API, file API, network API, DB API. So these kind of APIs are there that is being handled by LibUV library, right? So these function is going to be assigned to the specific API, and simultaneously sync function 3 block come into the call stack, and immediately it's getting executed, right? And this async function came for the execution into the respective API, right? And it's getting started executing over here. Now our fourth block of function come into the call stack, and this is also async, so it will go to the API, right? So once it will come to the API, then suppose that here I'm going to have this async function inside the timer API, right? So but before that, what happened? See here, our main function, this is our main thread, right? And this main thread is getting completed. So our main thread is getting completed, but still our asynchronous functions are getting executed, right? Inside our Node.js libview. So now suppose that this async function is getting assigned to the timer API. Once these functions are executed, right? They are completed, then they have the events, right? So the result needs to be reverted back with the help of event. So now once they are completed, now our event loop come into the picture, right? So event loop is nothing. This event loop is having, we have two kind of task queue. One is task queue that is known as a macro task. Another one is micro task queue. Okay. So whenever I'm talking about a callback function, always callback functions event are getting registered inside task queue, right? And promise is getting registered inside the micro task queue. That we are going to detail differences in our upcoming videos, but here just understand that callback functions events are getting registered in task queue, and promise functions event are getting registered in micro task queue, right? So now if you see here, see, our callback came into the task queue, macro task, and promise come to the micro task queue. Now what will happen here in the event loop? Event loop always try to check our task queue and micro task queue, right? So as of now, we are having two tasks, right? One is function 2 and function 4. So which one will go into the call stack first? Always we are having the priority to the micro task queue, right? So if anything is there in the micro task queue, it will go first. This is a very important question. Most of the time interviewer are asking, and they are trying to make you confuse in difference between the task queue and micro task queue. So always micro task queue is having a priority, and the event will go first to the call stack. So see here, now it's our promise went to the call stack, and it's getting executed here, and it's gone, right? Again event loop run, and event loop will check, do we have anything inside the micro task queue or not? If we don't have anything inside the micro task queue, then after that this function 2, async function 2 will go back to the call stack and getting executed and went out from there, right? So this is all things is happening inside the event loop at the background of Node.js execution, right? So now the important thing is to understand we have our JavaScript code, and that JavaScript code is getting executed on top of V8 engine, and inside this engine we have our call stack. So all the functions block are getting registered inside the call stack, and if they are synchronous functions, they are getting executed immediately. But if they are asynchronous functions, those async functions are getting assigned to the APIs, and APIs getting called by using LibUV library, and they are getting assigned a thread to that particular task, and they are getting executed. And if they are specific to a callback function, then it's going to be assigned to the task queue, and if they are promise, then they are going to assign to the micro task queue, right? And microtask queue is always having a priority than task queue. And event loop always check their task queue and microtask queue, right? So this is what happening inside the background. So whenever interviewer is asking about event loop, so it's not just about the event loop. You have to explain about call stack, APIs, type of APIs, LIBUV libraries, worker thread. These threads are nothing. These are known as a worker thread, right? About the thread pool, about the task queue, microtask queue, V8 engine, right? So you have to explain everything. So interviewer will understand that yes, you have a very depth knowledge in Node.js, right? Now let's see some actual asynchronous code and how they execute and what are their execution order, right? So here you see, here I have all the type of asynchronous functions, and we have also some synchronous functions as well, right? So our main thread will start from here, and the first line will be executed as a start of the script, right? This is a synchronous function, so it will be getting executed immediately. The next line of code is also a synchronous function, so again it will come to the call stack and it will execute it immediately, right? But if you see here, the set timeout, set interval, and set immediate, these all are the asynchronous functions type of callback. So these are going to be executed inside our API. They will come to the call directly. They will go to the API. And similarly, and set immediate also will come to the call stack and it will go to the API. So here for this set timeout 3, and I'll mark it a line number 1, and I'll mark this as a line number 2, right? And this is also our callback function. So it will go to the API and it will be executed. So here I'll mark it as a block number 4. Again here set immediate, this is again a callback function. It will go to the API. So here I'll mark it as a block number 5. Okay. Now promise will come, right? So promise also a asynchronous function. So this will go to the API and it will be executed there, but it will go to the microtask queue, right? So I'll mark it as a block number 6. Okay. And then this read file is a callback function. So this is also asynchronous function, so I'll mark it as a block number 7. Okay. Now this process.nextTick. Process.nextTick, I told you that this is would be considered as a promise, but it is having priority than promise, right? So I'll mark it as a promise. This is my promise, and I'll mark it as a block number 8. Now we have again our asynchronous code, which is console.log. So this will be executed. I'll mark it as a line number 9. Okay, this would be 9. So what would be their order of execution? Their order of execution will be, first of all, our main thread will start and our block number 1, right? Simple console.log will execute, right? And then after that, this synchronous code will execute, second number. And then after that, I told you main thread is not going to wait for any asynchronous functions, right? So eventually it's going to execute it, the 9th one, right? And here our main thread is finished, right? Now we have only asynchronous functions which are going to be executed inside our APIs, right? So how they will execute? So these 3 4 5, these 3 4 5 will come in the API, they will execute and they will come to the task queue here, 3 4 and 5, right? And here 6 is a promise, so it will execute through the API and it will come to the micro task queue as a 6, right? Then again we have a callback function, right? Read file, then it will go to the task queue because it's a callback, it will go to the task queue. After that we have process.nextTick. I told you that process.nextTick is always having a priority than promise. So it will come before our promise inside our micro task queue, right? And now our event loop is running, right? So our event loop first will check the micro task queue. It will find 8 and 6, right? So our next execution will be 8 and then 6, right? And after that, once all the events are finished from micro task queue, then it will execute from the task queue, right? So now 3 4 5 7 will be executed. So here 3 4 5 and 7 will be executed. So this will be the order of execution. Now let's run the same piece of code in our Visual Studio Code and see if they are executing in the same order, right? So let's flip to the Visual Studio. So here I have written the same piece of code. Now I'm going to execute this, and don't worry if you don't know how to set up our Node.js application. That we are going to do in our upcoming session where we are going to set up our entire Node.js application. But for now, I'm just trying to demonstrate you how our different type of asynchronous functions are executing inside our Node environment, right? So Now let me run this. In order to run, we have to write our command as a node, then file name. This file name is eventloop.js, right? So file name is wrong over here, right? So this will be event loop, right? Now see here we have the execution. Now if you see the very first line executed at the very first start of the script here, the second line executed as a synchronous code, this one, and the third line executed as a 9, which we have given end of script, right? See, this was our 9, so this is executed at third. Then our process.nextTick. I told you process.nextTick and promise are going to pick from Microtask queue, right? And process.nextTick is having priority, so it's going to be executed first. Then after that our promise, and after that our all the callback will be executed from our task queue. So this is set timeout, and after that set intervals, set immediate, and eventually we are having our read file callback. So this is how they are going to execute asynchronous functions inside our Node.js environment. I hope this is getting clear to you, but still you have any doubt, please leave me in the comment section and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Now further move and let's see what is the difference between setImmediate and process.nextTick functions, and what all the differences between task queue and microtask queue, right? So our very next question is, what is difference between process.nextTick and setImmediate, right? So process.nextTick runs immediately after the current operation. What does it mean? If any event is running inside the call stack, right after that our process.nextTick is going to execute. So what will happen? Process.nextTick will come over here and it will be executed, and right after that it will come to the microtask queue directly, right? And it doesn't matter whatever the events are there registered in the task queue or microtask queue. Always it will come to the microtask queue and it's having the priority than other promises, right? Inside microtask queue. So it's going to execute right after the current operation. So whatever the current operation executed, it will finish, and then after that our process.nextTick event will be executed, right? It is useful for deferring a task to the next event loop iteration, but ensuring it happen before any IO operation. So IO operations are happening inside the task queue as a callback. So it is executing before any IO operations. So what is the set immediate? So set immediate is a callback function. It getting executed over here. Then it will come to the task queue, right? And it run after the event loop complete. Once event loop is completed, after that this set immediate is going to execute, right? And it is idle for scheduling tasks that should execute after IO event. So once IO operation is finished, then after that our set immediate callback function will be called, right? And if you just keep this diagram in your mind, you will be able to answer most of the questions from how Node.js works internally, right? Now let's move to the next interview question, which is what is difference between task queue and microtask queue, right? This is a very, very important question. Now we have our next interview question, which is what is difference between task queue and microtask queue, right? If you remember our diagram, which is having here task queue and microtask queue, right? So task queue hold the macro task, right? Macro task is what? They are the callback events from our asynchronous functions, right? So callback events is handled by set timeout, set interval, set immediate, and IO operations, right? File read, HTTP request, right? All those kinds of asynchronous tasks are having their callback functions, right? And those are getting registered inside task queue. Then what is the microtask queue? Microtask queue holds microtask. And what all the microtasks are there? Microtask, all the promises, process.nextTick, those are known as a microtask. And those events are getting registered inside our microtask queue. And these microtask queue are always having priority than macrotask, right? And be remember that event loop always first check the microtask queue. If any callback events are there registered, first it will execute that callback event, right? And once all the events will be executed from microtask, then it will search from task queue and it will execute. I hope this is clear to you. Now let's move to the next interview question, which is how Node.js handle multi-threading if it is a single threaded, right? So our very next question is how Node.js handle multi-threading if it is a single threaded, right? This is a very important question, and this question is going to be asked certainly somehow, might be in a different way, but this is going to be asked for sure. We all know that Node.js is a single threaded. Why it is a single threaded? Because Node.js written on top of JavaScript, and JavaScript itself single threaded, right? So then how it handle the multi-threading? So let's try to understand. So whenever our code gets executed, our main thread is start, right? And main thread doesn't take care of any asynchronous functions over here. It always take care of the synchronous functions. So whenever we have the asynchronous function over here, it directly move to the API. Once it will come to the API, then there is a LIBUV library comes into the picture. And this is the library which is responsible for handling multi-thread inside our Node.js application. And this library is written in C++ and it's part of Node.js itself. So Node.js is written in JavaScript as well as some part of it in C++, and that some part is known as a LibView library. And this LibView library is having a thread pool, and that thread pool is having number of worker threads. So these idle threads are nothing, these are the worker threads, and these all are the dedicated worker threads, right? Once task will come over here, then one dedicated thread is going to assign to that particular asynchronous task, and it's going to be executed by the API. And once that task is completed, then their callback events are going to be registered inside either task queue or Microtask queue. If it's a callback, then their event are getting registered inside task queue, and if it is a promise, then it's going to be registered inside Microtask queue, right? And event loop are running over here continuously. So event loop will check first Microtask queue, and it will pull the event, and it will send to the call stack for the execution, right? And once all the events are finished from Microtask queue, then it will fetch the task from task queue, and it will send to the call stack, right? And during that, our main thread is not going to wait for the response from the asynchronous operation. It will finish. So our main thread is going to be finished. It's not going to wait for any asynchronous task. So once these asynchronous tasks are getting completed, their events are going to be registered over here, and those events are going to be executed inside call stack with the help of event loop. So this is how Node.js handle multi-threading inside Node.js environment, even if it is a single threaded, right? So now let's see. Node.js handle multi-threading with the help of worker threads, and those worker threads are part of the LibUV library. And it allow you to run JavaScript code in parallel in a different threads, right? This is very important. And this is particularly useful for CPU bound tasks that might otherwise block the main thread and prevent the event loop from handling IO operations efficiently, right? So now I hope this is clear to you how Node.js handle multi-threading even though if it is a single threaded. So the main component is here LibUV library that is written in C++, right? Now let's move to the next question. How garbage collection handle inside the Node.js, right? So here our next interview question is how garbage collection handle in Node.js. So garbage collection in Node.js is handled by V8 engine automatically, and it use mark and sweep algorithm to handle the garbage collection. Basically, it create two generation. One is young generation and another one old generation, right? So in young generation, there is a concurrent garbage collection running, and old generation, there is a incremental garbage collection is running, right? So if the object is new, that is going to be considered inside young generation. If that object is going to be old, it's moved to the old generation by using mark and sweep algorithm, right? So now garbage collection manage memory in Node.js using mark and sweep algorithm, right? And generational garbage collection help optimize memory management by dividing object into young and old generations. So there are two generations are created. One is young generation, another one is old generation. And young generation is having concurrent garbage collection, and old generation is having incremental garbage collection. And these incremental and concurrent garbage collection minimize application pause during memory cleanup, right? And the most important things, developers rarely need to interact with garbage collect. It's automatically handled by V8 engine itself, right? And that would be enough for the garbage collection in Node.js. Now there would be one more question can interviewer ask, like what are the disadvantages of Node.js? And in another way, interviewer can ask, in which scenario we should not use the Node.js, right? So now let's see our next interview question as what are the disadvantages of Node.js? So our next interview question is, what are the disadvantages of Node.js, right? So our very first disadvantage is callback hell. Callback hell means we are using callback inside a callback, nested callback, right? So it is very difficult to manage if you are having callback inside another callback. And if you are having more than 6, 7 nested callbacks, then it would be very difficult to manage all those callbacks and their outputs, and code is going to be very messy. So in that case, we have an option to use promise or async await, right? So that issue can be resolved by using promise and async await. The second issue we have with Node.js is lack of strong typing. Since Node.js is based on JavaScript, and JavaScript itself, it's not a strong type language, right? So here we have a lack of strong typing, but still that issue can be resolved by using TypeScript, right? TypeScript, it's just a superset of JavaScript. If we are adding type to the variables, then that JavaScript become as a TypeScript, right? So it's very easy. Don't worry about that. I'll explain everything once I'll be having our practical demonstration. And the very third thing, it's having the low performance in heavy computational tasks. Suppose that at the server side, you are having some kind of running your report query, which is taking around 10 to 15 minutes from the database, then it's not a good choice to use the Node.js, right? So in that case, we can use other server side language like C#, Java, but still Node.js is one of the fastest runtime environment from other languages like Java, and it is more than 10 times faster than that, and always Node.js known for the performance, right? So this is all we have about the disadvantages of the Node.js, but still Node.js is one of the fastest runtime environment as of now running in the industries. So now we have covered all these questions from Node.js basic, like what is Node.js and why we use Node.js, what is difference between runtime environment and framework, what is V8 engine, what all the feature and advantages of Node.js, and what is non-blocking IO and why it is important in Node.js, what is event loop, this is a very important we have covered, right? And what is difference between process.nextTick and setImmediate function, and what is difference between task queue and microtask queue, this is also very important. And how Node.js handle multi-threading if it is a single threaded by using our LIBUV library, right? And how does garbage collection works in Node.js, and what are the disadvantages of Node.js. Now in the very next section, we are going to cover Node.js project setup interview questions. These project setup interview questions are not very important, but you must be knowing how to set up the project, because that is going to be used once you are going to work on the application, right? So in our next section, we are going to cover Node.js project setup interview questions. So this will come to the end of this video. I hope this was helpful to you. And friends, if you have learned something from this video, please don't go without subscribing this channel, because it's given me a lot of moral support to make quality videos for you. Also, please share this video to your friends, colleagues, and to the people who really need it. That's all for the day. I'll see you in my next video. Till then, take care and keep learning.